Dr. Lee Harwell, and he had a club foot. He was born with a club foot, and that did not suit him for being a farmer. He couldn't work the land, get out, and to take care of things. So he became a doctor then instead. In those days, you were apprenticed to a doctor, a famous doctor who'd already made his way, and then you had certain tests you had to take, but you didn't study in it.
Well, it sounds cheaper and easier to become a doctor,
easier way,
right?
but
Yeah.
they didn't have that much knowledge about, and they got everything. They got the psychiatric, and then so they had to treat everything, and just being a country doctor. But he had married my mom's oldest sister, Lou, and she died in childbirth with a girl that looked just pretty much like my grandmother. And she ended up with the white, silver hair like the Irish, and was really a pretty lady. The next sister was Dora, and everybody called her Doe. And Doe was the one who inherited his kids to take care of them. He had 3 kids. And he had his eye on my Aunt Doe. And so he was a doctor in the little village of Hendrickson, southern Missouri. And the county seat was Poplar Bluff. So after they got married, they ended up going down to Poplar Bluff. And he was an extraordinary man. He not only was a good doctor and took care of everybody, even the blacks that were segregated back in those days in Poplar Bluff, Missouri. One side of town was the blacks, and there was complete segregation. The blacks, you didn't see them. They didn't get into our schools. They did not get to even go to the movies. It always bothered me when I'd be in a line to get to movies. If there was a couple of blacks in the line, there would come the manager running out and make sure that they were removed from the line. They could not drink out of fountains that we drank out of. And I think they got a bum rap because my uncle took care of all of them. And he was the only doctor that they had, just about. One day he said, "I want you to go with me." And I was in his house, and he said, "I want you to go with me. I'm going to make a house call, and I want you to meet some very fine people." And so we got over, and the minute we turned, I knew we were going to the black section of town. And he invited me to go in with him. And it was an older couple, and they had this little pot-belly stove in the middle of the room. That's the only heat they had. So they were, feeding that wood. And then there was a strange smell, and I was just really intrigued with that. And so after we left, I said, "Well, what was that smell?" They were boiling something in the water there. And he said, "Well, it was aspidity." Well, I didn't know what aspidity was, but I guess it was an herb that they knew about that would treat colds and flu and things like that. So they were using their own methods, plus he was a pill doctor, of course. Most doctors are. And he also prescribed and gave them pills to take care of it. But I always remembered that, and I felt really badly when I would see how the blacks were not allowed in our schools, couldn't even go to the movie houses, and certainly couldn't eat with you. I grew up with segregation, and he was not going to allow me to think badly of blacks, so he made a big point with that. He was one of my favorite people, because I know we moved with my grandmother, who wanted to go back to her homestead, which was 1,500 acres up north of Poplar Bluff. If I got sick, he would say, don't take her up to that that old home it's got it's drafty, and she could just stay in the front bedroom here, and I'll look in on her. So he would take care of me, and I thought, well, Uncle Lee's the only person that could take care of me. So I had scarlet fever and a smallpox, I think it was, in his home, and I always had my own hospital in his own house there. And Aunt Doe was so good to me too. So she took the place of my grandmother that we'd lost. My mother said, we'll go see Uncle Lester. Lester was their child. But there were 5 generations of doctors, and they all were J.L. Harwell. One was J. Lee, followed by J. Lester, and he had J. Larry, and he had John, I don't know what his middle name, but it's something L. That's back in, he's in New Orleans now, a doctor down there. But there was 4 generations of doctors from the Harwells. He was also called the Sage of the Ozarks because he wrote poetry. And I just found letters that he'd sent to me when I was in college, and a 3-cent stamp.
Oh yeah.
So of course it's all fading now, and at that point, Aunt Doe had died, and he was living with one of his sons, which was he was an engineer, but his name was Glenn, and he was living in his home and around sort of around where Branson is, down in that part of the eastern part of Missouri. It was an interesting family, but I remember the first time that I had to have another doctor, and it just really threw me. I was driving at 16. I was driving, had my mom in the car and her cousin Gladys, and that was Lee Harwell's daughter, and her daughter Shara. And Cher was just a couple of years younger than I. She was still in high school, and I had graduated. So we went to Jonesboro College for summer school. We were all staying at a lady's house whose father had founded Jonesboro. He was a big man in getting the college started there. And my mom ended up graduating at 50 to get her BS in education from the same, she'd always go down south to Jonesboro, Arkansas. And I found out the year I went down there that I was a damn Yankee. That was a big shock to me because I never thought of myself as damn Yankee. We cooked Southern, so I thought, well, I must be on the side of the South. And we lived in Southern Missouri, so what else would matter? But I started having these severe pains when I'm on the road down to Jonesboro. And my mom says, pull over. And so I had a hard time getting the car stopped because my appendix was rupturing.
Oh, wow.
And so my mom said, we're going to the hospital. And I said, oh, we can't do that. Uncle Lee won't be there. And I guess she relayed that to him, because when I woke up the next day, woke up from the anesthesia, he was in the chair next to my bed and looking on. So I was so relieved, but you don't know what to say when you're that young, but it was like, yes, he is with me. So he had gotten up in the middle of the night and got in his hoopie, and I guess he was a driver from out of hell, because he was used to just driving that car and turning off on rural roads and knocking down saplings to get to these remote little farmhouses. So I went on one of those trips with him, and I don't think I went on another one because there was no fence here, and he just wheeled it off, and there was no road either. He's just going down this hill and knocking over saplings, and we were just Well, it was a wild ride if you were looking out for a wild ride, but it kind of shocked me.
And what's a hoopie?
Well, that's just a hoopie is an old car with a little seat that raises up.
Oh yeah, like what do they call that? The
Coupes.